Managers, what's the weirdest thing an employee did or said? Coworker said he was looking to get a cat. Over the weekend, another coworker got him a cat without asking. On Monday, first employee announced he got his new cat. Second employee was like, "Oh, I got you one too." Obviously, first employee did not accept this gift, so employee 2 now had their own cat. Who gets another person a pet without asking? Story 2. So many to select from. Had an employee who used to walk to work wrapped in a comforter, except she wouldn't take it off while working. She was the receptionist. The same employee went MEA for like 2 hours. She locked herself in the bathroom and management had to hunt her down. She had made a bed of paper towels and passed out on the bathroom floor. Subsequently, she was let go, and months later we found vodka bottles in the bathroom. Story 3. I have so many to choose from. One time we had to hire this one girl because her dad worked in another department. This was a corporate accounting position. She was always on her phone and was on her last chance on a PIP. I saw her scrolling through Facebook. I told HR and they brought her in and proceeded to let her go. She looked at me and said she was listening to music. I said, "No, you weren't." She said she was trying to find her dad's number. I said, "No, you weren't." She said she was texting her mom because she didn't feel good. I said, "No, you weren't. I know what Facebook looks like." "And you were on it?" She goes, "Okay, yeah, I was on Facebook. I guess we will both agree this position is not a good fit and I'm giving you my notice." HR said, actually, we are terminating you. Fun times. Story 4. I had an employee who was super excited because something was going to happen that night that hadn't happened in over 800 years. Spoiler alert, it was a blue moon. I was like, "Isn't there a blue moon every couple of years?" She said obviously not, because she certainly would have noticed something as spectacular as a blue moon. That's when I mistakenly thought it would be a good idea to mention that blue moon aren't actually blue. She didn't believe me at first, but she looked it up and found an article by NASA explaining blue moon. She literally burst into tears and started sobbing about all the poetry she has written about the blue moon. She ended up leaving early because she was so upset. Before you feel bad for this poor young teenager who didn't know any better, she was 54 years old. Story 5. I owned a company and had a pregnant woman working for me. She no-showed to work for several days. At my company, that means you quit and no longer have a job. Then she called me and asked if she still had a job. I instantly knew that she was trying to set me up for some sort of discrimination claim due to the fact that she was pregnant. I also suspected that I was being recorded. So I said, "Of course you still have a job. Come on in." Never heard from her again. Story 6. After giving someone a performance evaluation, marking them as not meeting expectations for their communication style, the person asked for examples of the unacceptable behavior. I pointed out a very specific instance in a meeting where what they said was wholly unprofessional. This person proceeded to tell me I shouldn't be judged on my oral communication based on what I said during a meeting with my colleague. Story 7. I had a girl who was really good friends with a girl from another department. Her friend was fired, and a few days later, the girl in my team asked me if she can be fired. She sent me a message on Teams, and the conversation went, "Her. Did you know that X has been fired?" Me. "Yes, I heard." Her. "Ugh, that's so not fair. I want to be fired too." I explained that there is no reason for her to be fired. She's a nice girl, but she's not the sharpest tool in the box. Last Tuesday, the MD for the UK, Kylie, came into the office. She got really excited thinking I was talking about Kylie Jenner's Story 8. I had the highest potential employee I've ever known throw away his job/career. We worked for a very well-respected specialist technical consulting firm, and he was our star graduate. His IQ was at least 190, and he had technical skills that blew away some of the most technical specialists in the country. He got the big picture and was great to work with. His only issue was he was quite immature and had a big mouth. In 6 months, I watched him constantly complain about other people's work very loudly and publicly. A few managers came together to complain about his attitude, so I had a conversation about his behavior with him. No official warning, just a chat about how some people perceive him. He went on to dig deeper and just turn into a nasty person for no reason at all. Burned every bridge, and he eventually quit. We had plans to make him a managing principal, and he threw it all away because he couldn't take criticism. I remember saying, "Just so you know, Steven thinks you're disrespectful towards him, and that's concerning because I know you love working with and learning from him." His response was, "That's probably because I don't respect him." All of it was so out of character as he was legitimately the best, highest potential person I've ever had work for me. Story 9. I have the opposite. I gave a written 2-week notice to a part-time job I had expressed displeasure in already. The manager was on vacation. I told her assistant that was covering about the notice I left on the manager's desk, and the assistant said that was my problem, and she wouldn't tell her. My last day, the manager comes back. I told her about the whole thing, and she tells me I have to work an additional 2 weeks. I was like, "No, I gave a written notice and told the person covering for you." But my manager told me that didn't count. She put me on the schedule for the next few weeks. I didn't return and don't feel bad either. That place was awful. They continued to contact me about work for nearly 2 months, always acting like they didn't know I left and continued to schedule me. Story 10. I used to be a supervisor for a large plastic manufacturing company. I had a male employee come up and tell me he had to leave because he was having a baby. I shut down his machine and he left. About 3 hours go by and he comes back in and finds me. He tells me he's back and asked what machine I wanted him to go to. I immediately asked him, like, dude, why did you come back? If you're having a kid, you can take some time off. It wasn't a big deal. He told me I must have misunderstood and said he was trying to have a kid. I laughed my ass off and didn't even care, turned his machine on and went about my day. Next day, plant manager asked about why his press was down for 3 hours. We laugh about it to this day. Story 11. We had a new ops manager who lied to our UPS sales rep about volume and got us a hugely discounted rate. A few months later, our rate got bumped up and we were back charged based on our real volume. New ops manager was so outraged because he looked bad to the owner of the company that he started screaming at the UPS rep and ended up throwing a 3-ring binder at his head when he couldn't somehow give us the rates based on fake numbers. Story 12. One guy I terminated for payroll fraud claimed, with a straight face, that this was my fault for not explicitly telling him not to steal. He was 55 years old, in case you're thinking this is a kid story 13. One of my staff called me and gave me his 2 weeks a while back. He was unable to work and do school at the same time. After talking a bit more, I thanked him and said I'd see him tomorrow. He's like, no, I'm giving you my 2 weeks. I won't be in anymore. I'm like, so you're just quitting without notice then? He's like, no, you don't understand. I'm giving you my 2 weeks. I'm just like, okay then, just to confirm you're not working any of your shifts. He said yes because I'm giving you my 2 weeks and hung up. Story 14. We had an employee who wasn't entirely mentally stable. I sat in HR with him and noted behaviors that needed to change. He left the meeting, walked out to his car, and punched his door 6 times. Then he was standing out in the parking lot smoking, so I called him back in. We showed him the footage from 5 minutes before. He said he could do whatever he wanted to his property. We offered anger management and reminded him our company has good mental health benefits. He freaked out, played recordings of us having talks as evidence for a lawyer, then called us all liars. We let him go and never heard from a lawyer. Story 15. I've held a variety of jobs. This was my favorite when I worked as an IT project manager. Normally, our company's intern were college students. One summer, our VP was asked to do someone a favor, and I was blessed with 2 high school students. The kids were polite and well-behaved, but they were 2 kids in a very adult environment. I was in a meeting with one of our biggest vendors. Our meetings were held in an open area outside our offices. The vendor's lead was demonstrating some very expensive software that we were thinking of leasing. During the meeting, I noticed that the 2 interns were taking turns popping their heads out of the office they shared. They'd take a quick peek at us and then pop back into their office. This went on repeatedly. Finally, I excused myself to check out what was going on. When I confronted them, they squealed, "That's Mark Summers from Nickelodeon." Nope, I admit the guy had a passing resemblance, but why would Mark Summers be selling software? Story 16. We are essential personnel and snow removal is part of our job. It's in our contract that if it starts snowing while working, you cannot leave unless released to go home, barring being legitimately sick or you have an emergency. I had someone call me to say she was going home because it was snowing. I replied that you can't go home unless released, because we may stay late to do snow removal, and I'll keep you posted. She got all bent out of shape at me and threatened to call her union. I advised her to please do so if she wishes, and she hangs up. Union president calls me to ask for the story and basically tells me she agrees with me and told my subordinate to stay at work until released or be subject to disciplinary action. LMAO, it is literally in the job description and union contract. Story 17. I worked at an upscale senior community in their offices. We had a high school intern that I nicknamed Bambi. She was a sweet girl, but absolutely clueless. One day, she showed up for work wearing a midriff blouse that showed off her belly button piercing. One of the VPs asked me to talk to her as he didn't feel comfortable approaching her about it. When I told her that she would have to go home and change, she looked bewildered. She didn't understand why. I told her that it was inappropriate for a business environment. Our offices allowed business casual, but that meant she needed to have her midsection covered up. She still didn't get it. I asked her if she was allowed to dress this way at school. Her reply, "No, but this isn't school." Fortunately, she complied. Story 18. Employee posted a picture of himself laying on the sales floor with a vape in his mouth. Customer complaints about employee possibly drunk in the store. Manager confirmed walking in one afternoon unannounced, and the employee was sleeping in the back on the floor on cut boxes with a bottle on the desk. Story 19. One of my team wore a leotard with a see-through lace dress over it. Didn't meet dress code, but everything was covered, so I talked to her and asked her not to wear that outfit to work again. An older man from a completely different department and different area of the building came over into our area just to gawk. And then he filed a harassment complaint because of her outfit. Head of HR had to pull him in and explain that if anyone was harassing, it was him coming over to stare at a coworker when he had no business purpose in the area. Story 20. Told me he had been absent because he broke his junk, had a doctor's note and everything. Before I could stop myself, I exclaimed, "What? How?" Quickly followed by, "Sorry, don't tell me." Story 21. Hired a retail sales associate/cashier. Her first day, while being shown how to clock in, she announced that she would be unable to touch the register because her body is magnetic due to a medical condition, and any electronics she touched were immediately fried and would no longer work. She thought she could just talk to customers and fold clothes, I guess. Her next shift, she showed up wearing one of those copper bracelets and announced she could touch electronics now because the bracelet grounded her magnetic field. All the managers and sass in the store just stared at her both times. It was wild. Story 22. Oh man, so many to choose from. I had this one guy who used to walk around the office in his socks. He perpetually had his fly down. He was awful at his job, and no matter how much we trained him or sent him to shadow other employees, he just could not get it. We put him on a PIP and said we'd meet weekly to review his performance and go over any questions or problems he had. We get to the first meeting and he's completely unprepared. Hasn't done a single thing on the plan. For example, he was super disorganized, so he was to write a weekly prep list for his upcoming meetings so he could plan with his supervisor. His list was write to-do list for PIP meeting, scribbled on a piece of paper. We tried to make it work, but when a client called about him falling asleep during a meeting, he was observing I was done. I called him into my office to let him go, and the conversation goes like this. Me: "I'm sorry, but we have still not seen any reasonable improvement in your performance. At this time, I'm going to have to let you go." Him: "Would it be all right if I called my dad first?" Me: "For like a ride or something?" Him: "No, I just want to ask him what I should do next." Me: Do you want to just call him from the parking lot after you clear out your stuff?" Him: "No, would it be okay if I called him right now? I just need to know what to do." Me: "No, I would prefer we not call your dad from my office. Please go pack your things and go." This was a grown-ass man in a professional office environment. Still to this day, the weirdest guy I've ever worked with. This wasn't mine, but another manager I work with had someone refuse to leave the building and get trespassed because they wouldn't accept his demand to think about it over lunch. Story 23. I had an employee that had this weird twitch he would do where he was always scratching his balls. Mind you, this is in a professional office environment, corporate help desk. Over time, he got the nickname Itchy, and it was commonly joked about that he was pleasure himself. One day, I got a complaint from a woman on the team that he was talking to her while she was sitting down, and he was standing up, and he kept tugging at his balls. I had private talk with him. He was embarrassed about it, but was understanding. A few days later, I had one of my reports come up to me and tell me that he caught itchy pleasure at his desk. I told him I'd talk to him about it. I never did. I had already talked to him about him scratching his balls around people, didn't feel like doing it again. Long story short, I ended up firing him for unrelated issues months later. The Friday after he was fired, we had a happy hour. The guy that told me itchy was pleasure at his desk asked me why I didn't fire him when he told me that. I told him that I'd talked to him before about scratching his balls in front of people before, and I didn't think it was worth firing him over a second complaint. He told me, "No, dude, he wasn't scratching himself. He was sitting at his desk with his junk out, and he was literally pleasure himself." Story 24. Employee claimed she was pregnant. We congratulated her. Time goes by and someone says something about her still not showing yet. Next day, she comes in with a soft, squishy baby bump that would drift to the side. She would just casually adjust it back to the middle. Story 25. Oh, so many. 1. Came to me because another employee stole her pain meds. Called cops. 2. Okay, guess whose name wasn't even on the meds? 2. Another said he needed time off to take care of his mom, who was dying. She was fine, and he was testing waters at a new job. 3. Tried to trade me their 1-year-old car for $250 for heroin money. 4. Got caught sleeping with another employee in an ambulance owned by a strict Jewish community when the driver went to find out why their ambulance was parked next to another firehouse. 5. Big girl in very short skirts sat on our dirty shop floor with her legs open, doing something she couldn't reach due to low shelf. It was just easier for her that way, honestly. When her fiancé coworker asked her to get up, she made a scene and yelled, "They all probably all like this view, unlikely your sorry ass." 6. We were drinking after hours, saw the boss and freaked out and ran away. The boss was just drinking with us 5 minutes prior, but had to go get his keys. He forgot and was holding a beer. Story 26. I, on a day of national celebration of legislation protecting same-sex marriage, our corporate office posted a pic on our intranet with headquarters flying the rainbow flag. I was having a one-to-one with a brand new employee who reported to me. I opened the browser to show her something and got a nice surprise to see the flag. I commented something about how nice it was for them to take a stand. She launched into a bunch of hate speech. I said, let me stop you right there. You need to support company values while you're in the workplace, and that kind of talk is unacceptable. She continued, I fired her as soon as HR let me. Story 27. Food manager at a major resort asked coworkers, off the clock but at huge employee housing complex, if they'd tried their roommate's finish. 2 guys. I eventually wrote a HR report that got the Mormon HR lead to curse out loud mid-read. I just happened to witness quit a bit of less than okay things. He got fired and stored off, gathered like 100 staff and said he was about to be fired because he was gay and they were discriminating him. One chef asked me to sit in a communal area with him for a movie because this guy creaked him out bad, but was his boss. Ended up saying if he went in a date, he could make him a top chef at the 5-star place on property. Kid was in employee cafeteria working. 13 years later, I'm recruiting for a different company, industry 3K miles away. Guess who I run into at another resort? Working butthole jobs. I let every other recruiter know his story too, duck that guy. Story 28. I worked with a guy a while back, same company but different team. He was on loan and given a task. He notified my manager it was done. When she went in to review a couple of things, they were wrong. When she emailed him to inquire about the errors, his response was, you told me to complete it. You didn't say it had to be correct. My jaw literally dropped when she showed me the email. Story 29. Tried to work with a guy for a couple months on a tardiness issue. He comes in too late to attend a critical meeting with a key customer. I grab him as he rolls into the office, and I ask him to come into my boss' office with me. Short and sweet, I tell him. We've had a lot of conversations. He's been written up and it hasn't worked, so today's his last day. Dude's entire response is, oh, okay, what happens now? Me. Now I escort you downstairs to HR and they process your exit. We walk out of boss's office. Dude's desk is left and HR is right. He goes left. Where are you going? Dude looks at me funny. Back to my desk, clearly to work. Me. Name. Today is your last day. You don't work here anymore. Dude. Oh, okay. And then follows me to HR. Story 30. We had a flexible working hours policy. You could come in anytime you wanted so long as you put in your 9 hours. I was one of the guys who would come in at 6 a.m. because I wanted to be off work with some daylight left. However, there was a guy in our group who would roll in around 10 o'clock. Smart guy, good engineer, a little quirky. When he took his lunch break around 2, he would go take a nap on the grass where all the windows from the executive building looked down. It wasn't a good image, even though the guy wasn't breaking any rules. Eventually, our director was asked by the CEO if he was one of his guys. Our director went to our department manager and asked about the guy. He explained the situation, but also told the guy to take his 2 o'clock nap somewhere where the execs weren't looking down on him. Story 31. Not an employee, but a guy I was interviewing. This was for a position. There was some junk behind him, and I asked him to pan his camera around the room. He was in a literal hoarder's house, with trash stacked all the way to the ceiling and just a small spot around his desk to sit. I was polite for a bit and was about to wrap up the interview when he pulled out this huge vape scepter and proceeds to take a huge rip off of it while answering a question about Terraform. I ended the interview right there. Story 32. I had an employee who was a fantastic welder, one of the best. However, he only showed up 4 days a week. I finally had to terminate him and asked why he worked 4 days a week. He answered, because I can't get by on 3. Story 33. I had an employee that suddenly started taking a lot of time off. It quickly got to a leave without pay situation. I met with her to discuss how her absences were a hardship on the rest of the staff. I tried to see if there was something we could do to work things out. I was the one to hire her. Felt like she had a lot of potential and wanted to see her succeed. She wrote a 3-page letter to my boss's boss, complaining that I was holding her to the same standards as everyone else. He called me into his office to tell me I did a great job. Story 34. I had someone abruptly ghost me due to a family emergency. Sent me a message that made me so nervous because I'm human too, not just a manager. And then they blocked my number. Never heard from them again. Story 35. We put up the plexiglass screens on each register at the grocery store at the beginning of COVID. One of the high schooler cashiers got bored one day and started licking the screen. Story 36. A senior engineer I used to work with used to work at a company where some employees in shipping took the delivery truck to go rob a bank at lunch. Story 37. Also had an associate who was in terrible standing apply for a trainer position, which would have been a promotion. Generally, even if I know there is 0 chance in someone getting a promotion, I'll always take the opportunity to encourage them and guide them on what they can do to get there the next time around, offer additional coaching, etc. Anyway, the interview was terrible. They obviously put no effort into prepping and thought their biggest qualification was their seniority. They admitted they wanted the position because they figured they might as well try something new since they had been in the same position for a long time. I'm not sure who was surprised more, them when I told them they weren't getting the position, or me when I realized they actually thought they were a shoo-in. To put it into context, they were on their final notices for both safety and attendance, not combined separate final notices. A second notice in any category makes one ineligible for promotion, barring rare cases. They ended up quitting because of that. It baffles me how people assume seniority is the only factor that matters for that type of position. Story 38. I was a supervisor, and one of my crew members called in sick, said he had to take his girlfriend to ER. A couple of days later, he turned in his notice. He hadn't been at air, but at a job interview. He then pulled a no-call, no-show, thinking his PTO would cover his 2 weeks' notice. PTO is accrued throughout the year in that company, and it was March. He ended up not getting any pay, as he had already used his accrued PTO and then some. He was not the brightest bulb in the light fixture, and he wasn't missed. Last I heard, he was in prison for circa. Also had an employee call in drunk, thanking he would be rewarded for his honesty. He was fired instead. Story 39. Had an employee do something similar to AP when I was still in management. Gave me his written 2 weeks notice, then requested to use his PTO for it. That's not how that works. It also wasn't like he was gonna lose it. It would get paid out, so not really sure what he was doing. Guy ultimately just flounced out that same day after being told he couldn't do that. Weirdest though was the guy who called me up on Christmas Eve and basically was blubbering about how he was all alone. His parents didn't want him, his roommate went home for the holidays, and he was butthurt about that because he thought his roomie should have invited him along, etc. Just a giant litany of woe is me that I really didn't need to know about. Get a therapist. Topped off by begging to be let off for Christmas so he could spend it with his parents. Never mind the aforementioned bit about they didn't want him around. Stop thinking logically about it. This after jumping at the chance to cover Christmas Eve and day since it was double time. Got very offended when I told him I was very sorry to hear all of that, but no, we can't let you have Christmas off after you all but demanded to be allowed to cover it. Launched into a tirade about how he's the best worker we have. Spoiler alert, not by a long shot. And he wouldn't put up with this. Replied that that was fine, but if he no-showed for his Christmas shift, he could just plan on not coming in anymore. Already had a couple write-ups for other things, so it wasn't a big deal. As expected, no-showed, and I covered it. The most bizarre thing was he had the nerve to show up the day after as if nothing had happened, and had another meltdown when I confiscated his badge and told him he was done. He made a sufficiently big scene. We had to have security escort him out and had to mail him all his crap that was left in his locker. Story 40. An almost employee did a phone interview, went well, had her come in the office for an in-person interview, that went well, made an offer, she accepted, asked if she could start in 2 weeks so she could give notice to her current employer. No problem. Friday before she starts, she comes into the office to take care of the paperwork. All is well. Sunday night, 10 p.m., she was to start at 9 a.m. the next morning. I get a text. Won't be coming in. Commute is too far. She lives 15 minutes away. Story 41. I led a team of engineers working on regulatory testing that is dictated very explicitly in the Federal Code of Regulations. I had a newer employee that they gave me because he was on a PIP in his old group, and they thought this might be a better fit. He decided to argue with me one day in the middle of the office that the way we were running this test was wrong. Well, no, it's not, because the regulations tell me to do it this way. At some point, I had to tell him that this wasn't a creative position, and he needs to just follow the rules. He proceeds to tell my manager that I didn't respect him, to which my manager just told him to work it out with me. Story 42. I was in the military and had a junior sailor who worked for me. He was a mess, falling asleep at his desk, failure to meet any deadline, and his uniform looked like he slept on a rock. I was constantly having to talk to him and document his deficiencies in writing. I honestly was at my wit's end, because I just didn't know what I could do to help him fix his issues. I sat down with him and another supervisor to talk to him. He openly admitted his failures and stated that he had had similar problems, other places he had worked. So this obviously had nothing to do with the job management style or anything like that. At my wit's end, I asked him, did he think there could be a medical component? And had he spoken to the doctors or did he want to go speak to the doctors? With a perfectly straight face, he informed us that he had spoken to his mother and he thinks everything stemmed from him having cerebral palsy as a child. I had to leave the room because he was so earnest and honestly believed that this could be his issue. The other supervisor and I were gone for about 10 minutes, trying to compose ourselves. We came back in where I informed him that it was impossible to have a cerebral palsy as a child. You either had it or you didn't, and it was highly unlikely if he had had the cerebral palsy, he ever would have been allowed to join the military. He lost his mind, convinced we were telling him his mother was a liar. We ended up discharging him from the military a few months later for inability to adapt. Story 43. I asked a senior accountant exempt employee to review an account and correct some item. Next day at a financial meeting with execs, CFO asks about that specific account. I told him it was fixed, at which point senior accountant pipes up and says it's not fixed. I about exploded, but told the CFO I'd get to the bottom of it. I pull senior accountant into my office and ask him why he didn't fix the account. His reason was because he's an exempt employee and therefore he can't work overtime. I told him he is expected to work until the job is done as an exempt employee. He didn't understand the difference between the two. He left a few months later, but I use that as a story to tell all my salaried employees. Story 44. I had an employee sleep at work and try to lie about it. She brought a pillow and blanket and was out for hours. She was supposed to meet with a new employee and didn't open the location or pick up the phone when any of us called. I sent another employee because we were worried about her, and then she was caught red-handed. I asked the employee about it, and she strongly denies it. She says it's a lie and gets super offended. I told her if you admit you were sleeping, I won't write you up or discipline you in any way, but you can't accuse another employee of lying. Accusations matter when we handle money. And you're forcing my hand if I have irrefutable evidence. You're lying on top of sleeping on the job. She says she'd never do it, and there is no evidence. Then I show her the video the employee took where she was snoring super loud and had a pillow and blanket. She turns red and says she'll admit it now to keep her job. I fired her. It wasn't the sleeping. It was calling another employee a liar and doubling down on it. Story 45. Another manager and I were counseling a guy because he screwed up. We liked him and were going easy on him, and he had a stress-induced seizure right in the middle of it. He came out of it 30 BC seconds later with no memory of it. Story 46. I work in a chain steakhouse. We had a dishwasher asked to go outside to his car to get an energy drink. He just never came back. He loved his job. He would wear chef coats to his dish shifts. He was beefing with the other dishwasher at the time. I will never know what was said, but he never came back. Story 47. One guy no-called, no-show for 3 days in a row. Shows up the following Monday. Is devastated that he was let go on the spot. He was told to retrieve all uniform items and return them, and at that time, he would be cut a final check. Guy storms out saying, "You can't hold my money from me." Comes back around 5 p.m. when everyone is trying to go home for the day. In he walks sagging pants, wife beater, and a pistol tucked into his waistband, just to make sure his check was right. Story 48. Weirdest? Once upon a time, I was the network cop. I'm not convinced this one is the weirdest. I know it isn't. But it's one I think I can tell without anyone figuring out who I am. Or if they do, damn them. They matter not to me these days. Well, not the big boss. He's still around and cool. I had to audit a VP's computer for shenanigans. We're hitting every machine in the company. First thing, within a second, I see a video file named 4. It started as what was clearly a camera placed on top of a TV and pointed at the empty living room couch, with someone off camera spending a few seconds adjusting the angle. Think Married with Children view of the couch they did so many times. I was expecting a video of sweet nothings for the guy's wife, or some "I love you so much" recording for an anniversary or something. I really was. I swear on my parents' grave, that's what I thought was coming. Not even close. Bud. Turned out the female name wasn't his wife's name, and about 10 seconds in, I see the guy walk away from the camera, naked as the day he was born, and then flop down on the couch with his weenie already standing at attention. And he instantly started to shake hands with the governor, if you know what I mean. And I think you do. I did not watch the video until the end, and I will posture that the guy was probably never embarrassed in a high school locker room shower, no matter how cold the water was. Weird enough? Story 49. We had a guy eating the vinyl magnetic signs corporate would send us to advertise sales. This was in an automotive maintenance center. When he walked by the sign, he'd take a tiny piece of it. Everyone saw the signs getting smaller. No one knew why until he just happened to be seen on camera. Story 50. Wasn't the guy's manager, but in a leadership position in the lab we worked in. I joked to my husband that he had active shooter vibes. I was just talking crap though, and didn't ever disparage him in the workplace, nor did I actually ever think he was a threat of any kind. He was just an awkward dude. We got along fine for the most part, although he had a tendency to buck the quality system and any redirection from female leadership. I was glad I didn't manage him. Anyway, we all came in on a Monday, and he'd apparently been working over the weekend, unauthorized. There was a weird series of post-it notes on his monitor and workbench that were written in red Sharpie. The last one, if you followed the trail, said, "I quit Ask My Wife." The guy was odd as mentioned. So this display was a spectacle like 15 minutes after the morning shift started. Couldn't get a hold of him at all. Cell straight to VM. We were talking about calling his emergency contact or the non-emergency line for a welfare check when his wife, who spoke very little English, the employee was a former service member who met and married his wife while stationed in Korea, showed up shortly after lunch with her newborn daughter in tow. She had no clue where he was and said she hadn't spoken to him since the day before. We were super concerned and really didn't know what to do. We asked her to stay in the office with our HR While we tried to find or get a hold of the guy, she was panicky and refused. She allowed us to pay for a cab ride back to their apartment, but that was it. She didn't drive between and took public transportation to get to the office. We felt bad and a bit helpless because after making contact with her, his emergency contact, we didn't have any business calling for a welfare check or getting involved at all. Even though the situation was clearly not okay, really wild, and honestly the most concerning/sad part. She showed back up that evening telling us she found her husband sleeping in the woodlands near their apartment, super disoriented and confrontational. He'd apparently been out there all night and day. She was there begging us for his job back. I DK because I wasn't his manager. I didn't get more details than that, but he apparently had some sort of a mental break. He went to inpatient treatment for a couple weeks, and we did allow him to return to his position. One of the most surreal experiences. I'm not a stranger to mental health struggles or addiction issues. I've never seen a situation unravel like that, though. After all was said and done, as annoying as the dude could be with his contrarian crap and grumbling about the rules, I was just glad that he was okay. I legit thought it several times that day that he'd done something to his wife and child. And then after they showed up, I was almost sure he'd hurt himself. Story 51. I had an employee that was paired with me for training. We did front desk work at a big hotel. She'd done well for the first week, so I took a hands-off approach. This time, instead taking her with me to clean the restroom and pool area. I left her to man the phones and set up reservation. I came back about 15 minutes later to see her crumpled behind the locked front desk door. I had to jump the counter to get in because she was uncontrollably babbling and shaking. Come to find out, she'd accidentally checked someone into a room that wasn't theirs. Easy fix. Then, when the next person called to confirm their reservation, she called them a fraud and told the guest his room wasn't available because he was in it. Not so easy to fix. So he got mad at her, cussed her, and told her she was an idiot. She was so fearful of this imposter that she thought he was going to hurt her, and her brain just jumped ship. So I showed her how to fix it by swapping the names and CC numbers on the reservation. No big deal. Also, handling the very tired and mostly disgruntled guest wasn't too big of a deal either. When it was over, I expected her to be calm and a bit easier on herself. I tried to put her at ease with a smile. She accused me of laughing at her and being an a-hole after I showed her how to fix a mistake that probably every front desk person had done. Well, she was super angry and told me that I better not tell our boss and get her fired or she'd slash all my tires and set my house on fire. This job was super important to her marriage because her husband was getting rid of her if she didn't stay employed. Apparently, threats aren't supposed to be funny, but that's also how I react to stress. I told her if she doesn't stop acting bat crap, I was going to go home and she can finish the shift herself. She stopped her bullcrap, but I went to the boss the next day. He lasted one more day because the boss wanted to give her another chance. She threatened the owner's daughter and was fired the next day. Story 52. Our company has great health insurance and at the time, no premium. I knew a guy who refused to sign up. He was there for years. He said he would have co-pays and deductibles if he did. He was clear. He has seen doctors and even been in the hospital. You just don't pay those bills, he says. And yes, it wrecks your credit. Story 53. I wasn't his manager, but he was in my team. He was technically competent, but for some reason became increasingly volatile and erratic personality-wise. We got off a phone call with one of our company's VPs and were on a call with just the team. He started immediately saying he never wanted to be on another call with the VP. He was a phony, he was an idiot, he was incompetent, you name it. He actually said, "Duck that guy, he can go duck himself," repeatedly. Once we got him to calm down long enough, we figured out the entire reason he was bent out of shape was because the VP had used some fillers when talking. He didn't usually, but he was nervous as he was delivering not so great news to the team. He had said, "you know," as a filler 3 times during the call. That alone apparently set him off. My manager called me later and asked me if I thought he was drunk. I told him I thought he was under or over-medicated. I wasn't sure. He had another incident like this where he lashed out against a stakeholder on the client side and badmouthed him, even though they were doing the team a favor. My manager was going to talk to him, but apparently before he could even bring that issue up, the guy went nuclear and started calling him racist names over my manager, literally telling him he needed to help onboard a new technical team member. When my manager told him to cool down and ended the call, this guy proceeded to text message him more racial slurs and xenophobic names to his phone. He completely lost it. I've never seen anything like it. Story 54, sales job. Had an employee who was about 2 or 3 days into training. We had given him a lead book. In the middle of his last day, he was bugging out, saying someone stole his lead book and he was feeling uneasy about his coworkers. He went on his lunch break and never came back. His lead book was right under his register, and when we closed out his drawer, it was short 50 or 60 bucks. Never heard from him again. I just always found someone stole my lead book to be a bizarre excuse for a freakout. Story 55. I managed multiple sites at elementary schools in the area for a small nonprofit. One day I get a call from the site supervisor, who had only stated a few weeks back. She says something weird happened with one of her staff. The employee asked for a ride home, and during the drive, just came out and asked the supervisor if she could buy some substances from them. Apparently because the supervisor had allergies that day and had wiped her nose a few times, the employee assumed she also had this habit and would be safe to ask. This employee also happened to work solo with groups of young children. I assumed she would be fired, but my boss just decided to relocate her to another school site to continue working with kids. Story 56. Had a driver, pizza delivery, say upon hiring that, "If you're going to perform experiments on me, please just let me know." Jen was crazy. Oh, and that she was an agent, and that's why people kept breaking into her apartment to steal her deodorant. Baskets in a glass display case, clear basket case. Story 57. This just happened recently, actually. As with most warehouses, we get a fair number of temps. Whenever we have a temp that can operate pit equipment, we do an evaluation to determine whether or not they can operate the equipment they say they can operate. It is 100% necessary, as I have evaluated plenty of candidates that had no idea what they were doing, but thought they could fake it. Anyway, a guy comes in for said evaluation and is pretty animated. I ask my usual questions about his understanding of the assignment, his experience, etc. He says he has a lot of experience, then starts complaining about the agency, how he always wanted a job here, but they were unnecessarily preventing him from doing so. Something about him being a smoker, and we are a non-smoking facility, so they didn't think it would work out. Complaints about previous jobs. Already, this does not bode well. I'm on the fence since he is enthusiastic about working here, and so I decided to test him on the equipment. Guy obviously has experience, and we need operators, and he's pretty much begging me for a job. Against my better judgment, I gave him a shot. On orientation day, he took painfully long to fill out 2 forms, to the point where I just asked him to take it home because it was holding up the presentation. The forms typically only take 10 minutes, and I had already waited 20 minutes. Might have went quicker had he not been using 3 different pens and stopping every so often to ask me to spell words for him. There was other little red flags, but for the most part, he hadn't said or done anything more extreme than I see out of most temps. I documented the interactions with HR since I had a feeling it could go south, and it's better to get ahead of it. Followed up with my trainer about how their portion of the orientation went, and he said the guy made a flippant comment about his paperwork not being in color. The printer ran out of ink. Few more odd things happened, but feedback from my lead after the guys is out on the floor suggests he is just a bit too eager to prove himself. I decide to hold off on training and see how he works in a team hand unloading containers. The next day, I'm out sick. He apparently tried to start a fight with the guys he was working with, then attempted to break and sharpen his safety knife into a shank to threaten them with. Obviously, he was walked out. On his way out, he said we obviously wanted him to fail because we gave him the only forms not in color. Should have gone with my intuition and not let it go past the evaluation. But I have a soft spot for anyone trying to get their life on track. Typically, though, people who come in with an attitude that the world is against them tend to be the common denominator. Despite my naivety, no amount of coaching can help that, especially since they usually get walked out before I can make that kind of connection. Story 58. Had a person working on her PhD. Mind you, 6 everyone in the office and external stakeholders that she was going on paternity leave. No one corrected her because she was a bully. She was referred to as Pat from then on out. Story 59. My friend had not 1 but 2 employees tell her they needed to leave early because they accidentally put in 2 tampons and hurt themselves. The first person she was not going to argue with, and it was such a weird thing to tell your boss. After the second time she heard that excuse, it became apparent she had the world's dumbest employees or they shared excuses. Story 60. I had an employer who diligently ensured she used her sick leave promptly so that she never had anything outrageous, like over 8 hours, accumulated on the books. The day she told me that she had to leave early because there was going to be a full moon out that night, I decided my best option was to not ask any question. Story 61. A guy that worked for me said he was coming in late because his wife needed more cuddle time. Even if it were true, why would you ever give that as a reason? Story 62. I was the employee. I was 17 and working at Subway because it gave me time to still do my homework when we got slow. Noticed every time I counted the cash register before getting off, it was off by a considerable amount. Her first reaction was to push me out the door and say she'd recount it and I must have counted wrong. I was in college math classes already at 17 and I could count some quarters and dimes correctly. I remember her saying previous employee was stealing and that's why she was fired. I quit because my instincts told me something was fishy and she was really rude anyways. A few months later, she was caught stealing from the register by the owner. She fired a mom with 2 kids, She caused people to have theft charges. It's by far the cruelest thing I've ever seen, and I was going to be her next victim. Still think about that all these years later. Story 63. I had a coworker that had 3 different sizes of butt prosthetics: small, medium, and jumbo booty. She was very thin and flat as a board. You could literally see they would shift and be off-center. Weird story 64. Not an employee, but my line manager, a senior manager, changed his profile picture on Slack to that of one of the 2 other senior managers a few days ago, said it was a good look, and has kept it there since. I'm still scratching my head. Story 65. I had to terminate a housekeeper in the health facility I was manager of. I told him why, and offered to walk down to HR with him to help him a new job that was a better fit for him. The only thing he said was that he was going to sue the hospital for discrimination. I explored what he thought being discriminated at this position would consist of. He couldn't think of anything that had happened, but he just kept insisting he would sue. SMH. Story 66. I had an awful job once where a woman started by being introduced to the office. She then cleaned her desk, put her personal whatnots on it, and asked where the office supply closet was. The guy next to her just laughed and said, "Wrong place for that." She just looked at him, said, nope, and then she packed up her personal things and walked out, and we never saw her again. Very weird, but I often wonder what became of her and why I suffered for a year there before finding an equally soul-sucking but slightly better job. Story 67. In the 2 weeks she worked for me, she started her period with permission left to go get cleaned up. Was gone for an hour and never clocked out. Then one day she took the pooled tip bucket into the walk-in without letting anyone know because the till needed one, as well as randomly disappearing in the walk-in without notice for no reason. When I let her go, she texted me a photo of a burnt pie and told me that I ruined her son's Christmas and wouldn't stop texting me about how terrible of a person I was. Eventually shifted toward another employee who had been her manager at another bar and had to let her go due to suspected substances use. I didn't know this until I had already hired her. What is the weirdest thing you've witnessed at work? There was a fire in the store I work at, towards the back of the store. We were getting everyone to evacuate, and a woman would not leave. She told me that since where she wanted to shop was not on fire, if she wanted to assume the risk of bodily injury, that I could not stop her. I had to try to balance not losing my crap on her with getting her to leave. Luckily, an older authoritative firefighter had just walked by and heard her, and he turned around and physically picked her up and careened her out as he took her to the exit. It was as if the retail gods finally cut me a break. He did what we all wanted to do. It was absolutely glorious. Story 2. Boyfriend, girlfriend, and BF's best friend came to the bar I worked at. They drank a lot, and the best friend somehow ended up duck with the girlfriend in the bathroom. Boyfriend figured it out and left while they were in the bathroom. But before he left, he ordered a round for the whole bar and left them with the tab. Story 3. Client brought his fancy pet chicken to the office. It made a beeline to the desk of a coworker who was a severe germaphobe and pooped on her keyboard. Story 4. I was working under a sink for some customers of mine when their daughter called them and told them she was pregnant on speaker. They went dead silent. The dad, "Do you have a boyfriend we don't know about? Who is the father, Sadie?" The daughter, "I don't know." Apparently she was in college. They were not happy. I finished up and got out of there as quick as I could. Said I'd email them the invoice and they could take of it later. Story 5. I worked at a McDonald's in high school. It was during the Beanie Baby craze. It was nuts. Cops had to direct traffic into the store because of all the wrecks outside. Anywho, these people were just paying for the toys. They didn't even want the food. I had the honor of opening a new box. While I was opening the case, someone yelled at me, "What's in the box?" It was a little black dog named Bones. So I looked up and said, "Bones?" Next thing I know, there were like 100 people all chanting Bones. It was wild. I met people who drove all over to get those things. Story 6. Construction job at a residential job site, a tower being built. Guy locked himself in the porta-john and wouldn't come out. Was in there for more than 30 minutes on a 32-degree hot summer day. I managed to open it from the outside, and turns out he OD'd, and when I opened it, he fell out of it with his junk still in his hands. He survived somehow. Didn't come back to that job site though. Story 7. Not weird, but unusual. I came to work a few minutes late because I thought I accidentally threw out $300 in the trash and had no luck finding the money. My boss said, "You're late." "Not now, Janet," I replied somewhat angrily. "My office now," she snapped back. I followed her into her office, expecting a fight, except she was now right in my face with her arms out. "Give me a hug," she said, then threw her arms around me. I almost cried. She told me it looked like something was wrong, so I told her about the missing $300. In spite of the missing money, my day went a lot better, and I learned that if I ever became a boss, I'd want to be like her. Oh yeah, I also found the money after I got home. Story 8. Seeing 1,000 bee stingers embedded in a patient, I would admit. She was mowing her lawn when she got attacked by a whole colony of bees. Helped the nurse SC the stingers with an index card, then basically supportive care. Story 9. Really sad, honestly. I used to work at a restaurant and this one lady came in. The hostess came to me and warned me that a weird lady sat in my section. I went out to say hi and the woman did some strange hand symbols at me. Not ASL, I'm fluent. It was like she was trying to ward me off. She told me that I will not be her server because I looked like Lady Gaga, who was a woman of Satan, low-key kind of a compliment. And so I said no worries and got her a new server. The woman continued to do the warding sign anytime someone walked past her table, and she demanded we get rid of the kiosk on the table because technology was evil. She ordered a coffee and cream and an extra plate. She put the plate across from her, as if in front of another person. She did a prayer, and then as fast as possible, opened and poured every creamer into the coffee and drank it. She talked to the invisible person the whole time, and had an old journal with wild nonsense written in it. She eventually paid and left, and on the receipt where you write for the tip, she wrote, "Say no to." Obviously, a very mentally ill woman, and I feel really bad for her. I hope she had a place to go home to. Story 10. Worked at a steel mill and a railroad car, which was on an elevated rail line, 20 feet above ground level, and loaded with 100,000 pounds of material, had been pushed so hard into the end stop that the body of the car lifted out of the truck, the part with wheels. Essentially, the truck has a round pocket and the body a matching circle that fits in it. Our boss had quotes for $10,000 to bring in heavy equipment to re-rail the truck and put the car back into the pocket and asked if our crew could do it. We said, no problem. We'll lift it with hydraulic rams and put it back into the pocket. We sort of bit off more than we could chew and had no plan as to how we were going to align the truck pocket with the circle. We were going to cross that bridge. When we got to it, we were drawing a crowd of workers, watching us lift the car, install beams to support it, shim the jacks, and repeat until we were high enough to yank the truck into position. When we got the railroad car high enough, the beam we were supporting the ram on started to bend, and I told the spectators to clear out. As the car slid over, the body popped back into the pocket. We started to break down the equipment, and the spectators asked how we knew that was going to work. We told them it was just our years of experience. Story 11, we had a supervisor and a department director get fired on the same day. They were close friends, so we automatically assumed it was connected. Found out a few days later what happened. The director, though, it'd be funny to send a pic of her tits to the supervisor for some reason. They're both women. The supervisor thought this was so funny that she had to share it. She apparently had been calling over team members all afternoon to show them the pic. She was completely shocked when she got called in from her vacation a few days later to find out she was fired. Story 12. Watched a guy try to play drums with a 25mm Bradley round. It went off and we actually were told to try to find fingers. He had a thumb and sort of a pinky left. Was doing security checks and fire extinguisher inspections at the same job. Pro-Lyle, about 2 a.m. Pull up to an old big building, unlock and check everything. It's a 10 by 10 room. Then the rest of the building is an open warehouse. All good. The room is next to the door. Then just openness. You can see everything from the doorway. As I'm walking back to my truck, the outdoor light pops on. Unlock, walk in, light switches up. Okay, turn it off and relock it up. 10 feet later, bing, light back on. I unlocked that Karen and just said, "Ghost, I gotta have this light off after you're done. Turn it off before you go, please." Locked it up and I was gone. Next night, that light was off. Story 13. Had a dude come into the public library I was working at and start playing a large wooden flute to a mannequin in a historically inaccurate Native American costume that was in a glass display case. Story 14. When I worked as a server, we were having insane forest fires, to the point the sky was red and it was raining ash. There was a warning not to go outside unless absolutely necessary because of all of the smoke and the respiratory issues it might cause, and all of the patios in town had been shut down. A handful of tourists insisted on sitting outside and were complaining that there wasn't a single restaurant that would let them sit outside. My boss opened the patio for them, and the girl who had to serve them was very unhappy. Story 15. I have been looking for an excuse to tell this story. I worked at an office that provided people with medical equipment. We had this older lady who was a patient whose husband would always come in to swap out her empty oxygen tanks for full ones. One day I was helping him get the cart of full tanks to their car. He tells me, kind of laughing, "I better warn you, we've got our bodyguard in the front seat." So I kind of laugh with him, thinking it's probably a dog. Then I get to the car to put the tanks in the back seat, and I see it. I wasn't even sure what it was at first. I'm staring at the front seat trying to figure out what I'm looking at. It took a second for it to register. They had the front seat of the car dressed up like some kind of scarecrow or something. A wig was on the headrest. A shirt was buttoned around the seat part, and they had something stuffed inside the shirt to look like shoulders. They had cut huge lips and eyes out of paper and taped them to the face part of the headrest. The man goes, "That's Bob Saget. And when I was setting the tanks in the back seat, I realized that the wife is sitting in the back seat while Bob Saget has been riding shotgun, and she was holding a stuffed dog and petting and talking to its Story 16. My hometown has an independent donut place. My grandpa was friends with the owner, but I didn't know him, and he was also my friend's uncle. I got a job at his bakery in the industrial part of town. This was when I was 17. It was my first job. When I was being trained, the 30-something lady told me to use my fingers to ice donuts. No gloves. I have OCD, so my hands were clean, but she then proceeded to ice a donut, wipe the excess drippage off with her finger, lick her finger, and then continued. This bakery serviced their shop, a big industrial plant's cafeteria, and smaller coffee shops. Story 17. Oh boy. I've been a licensed insurance agent for 16 years, and I specialize in Medicare health insurance. In the early days, pretty much everything was done at the client's home. Old school, sitting down at the kitchen table. I've been propositioned by a 65-year-old sex worker. I've had a gun pulled on me. I had an older gentleman answer the door who had forgot to put pants on. I've been in crack houses. I've been at homes covered with dead rats. The list goes on and on. But the weirdest thing I ever seen was back in 2009. I show up at my appointment and walk in the door. Two gentlemen over the age of 65 and myself are sitting down in the living room. They proceed to put adult film on the television and turn the volume way up. I finished the appointment and left after about 30 minutes. They had no intention of shopping for new insurance. They just wanted to torture someone. Story 18. Literally happened today. Our toilets have always been off in regard to pressure and flushing. Recently, they were fixed. Well, apparently not, because during my shift, water was spurting out of one of the toilets like a fire hydrant, flooding the entire back room and part of the sales floor. Story 19. I had someone try to pay the self-checkout register by placing their money on it. I guess thinking the cameras would scan their money and then they could walk away with it or something. Story 20. Police turning up to arrest a colleague and confiscate his computer one day at work, was found guilty of some CP charges. Not on the work machine, fortunately. We never used to be allowed internet access from our desktops back then. Story 21. I couldn't make this up. Years ago, I did tech support for a super small company. At the time, me and the other tech support guy, let's call him Gord, had our desks close to the front door. The only other guy that was in the office at the time, let's call him Eddie, was in the back room. Eddie had issues. I can't recall what it was, but he had mentioned that he would occasionally pass out unexpectedly. He told us he knew when it was coming a few minutes before it happened. We never saw that happen before, though. Well, that day, we're working along when Eddie comes racing from the back. He yells, "It's happening, boys. Let it ride and let me sleep it off." Mid-sentence, Eddie proceeds to pass out literally right in front of the front door. Not like a few feet away. No, like at the foot of the door. Out like a light. Splayed out. Done. For a few seconds, Gord and I were dumbstruck. Our brains were screaming for us to do something, but Eddie was pretty clear about what he needed, and we figured we'd honor that. So we went back to sitting at our desks like nothing happened while Eddie was passed out in his chinos at the door. For a few minutes, it was silent. Us working while Eddie was passed out mere feet from us. Then, as if summoned by the awkward gods themselves, FedEx arrived for the first time in a week. The door was solid wood, so it was a bit of a surprise to the delivery guy when he could only get it so far open. It was probably horrifying when he peered around the door to see poor Eddie on the floor, and to realize that the thud caused by his repetitive door opening attempts were caused by Eddie's hip. Perhaps now more at ease than the FedEx guy, and with muscle memory in full swing, Gord flips his chair around, seemingly unaware, at least to the FedEx guy, of the body in the floor and says, "I'll sign for that." The transaction was completed directly over the unaware Eddie. It was surreal. FedEx guy never once took his eyes off Eddie and never asked, but seemed shaken. Gord and I never explained it either, which I do feel bad about. For some reason, the whole situation was so bananas that logic seemed to have left for the day. About 30 minutes later, Eddie came to, said nothing to us, and went back to his desk at the back. None of us ever said anything about it after that, but man, that day was weird. Story 22. Used bookstore. Guy shouted, "Where are your adult movies?" at me. My back is turned. I turn around and he's wearing those Jeffrey Dahmer glasses, a fisherman's hat, 3 coats, carrying an inside-out umbrella, and has some kind of white goo smeared on his face and streaks, which I hope is some kind of lotion. I tell him that we don't carry any adult movies, and he's like, "Well, you used to," still being unable to use an indoor voice. I tell him that I've worked there for a couple years and we've never carried adult movies, and he shouts, "Oh, well, I guess you have to keep that away from kids." He walks out. Months later, we're tabling at a women's expo, and he physically bumps into, one of my coworkers who was with me at the time of the adult movies incident, and he's with a woman that's presumably his wife or girlfriend. I don't remember if he had the coat/umbrella/lotion thing going on, but his fly was down. Story 23. Not my work, but my wife's, then girlfriend. She was working 2 part-time retail jobs at the time, and she had a set schedule at the primary one, the one with more hours. So the secondary job scheduled her on one of the days she had to work her main job for the second week in a row, so she just no call/no showed. We had a roommate at the time, and while I was in the bathroom, apparently they called to see where she was. This was early 2000s, so we were too poor for cell phones. And as I was walking out, I heard him say, "You didn't hear? She was in a horrible accident last night and didn't make it." He gets off the phone and I ask, "Who was that?" And he says, "Wife's name's Work. I called her off dead." I was high as a giraffe pussy at the time, so I laughed my ass off for about 15 minutes before it clicked exactly what he did. I told him he needed to call them back and fix it, and he just laughed and left. The store kept calling and leaving messages, trying to find out when the funeral was and what her parents' address was to send condolences. STG, that was the worst day off ever. Ducker didn't come back until after I picked my wife up from her main job, argued all damn night until I finally got him to call them and tell them the truth. Obviously, my wife quit that job immediately. No way could she look at her old coworkers again. Story 24. A guy was getting his truck repossessed. He saw what was happening. He hauled ass out there, yelling the tow truck driver. Dude panicked while he was taking off. He hit 2 parked vehicles. Story 25. Once upon a time in the west of Oregon, I went to work for a potato chip company. First day on the job in the 1980s, I was looking for an empty locker to put my stuff in. I opened this one locker and there was a mini bong, and it still had a curl of smoke coming out of it. Knew I was going to like this company. We also made nut butters and trail mixes. It was a horrible place to work if you were a pothead. Munched all day long. And you've never had a better potato chip than one fresh hot out of the oil. Story 26. Kicked a guy out of my bar. He ran out the door and into the street, which was a super busy interstate. He looked at us and flexed and slapped his bare palms on the asphalt like 6 times while traffic negotiated his presence. Must have been 30 or 40 of us in front of the bar watching him. He reminded me of Donkey Kong. His hands must have looked like raw hamburger the next morning. Story 27. I used to work at a restaurant that had an oyster bar. One night was especially busy, and the guy running the bar ran out of ice. Instead of telling anyone or trying to fix the problem, he just stood there while tickets kept piling up, waiting for the ice machine to make more. Eventually, the servers noticed him just standing there, doing absolutely nothing, so we stepped in and got him the ice he needed. Story 28. I had a boss with 6 fingers. His adult-sized pinky had a baby pinky jutting off of it. No bones, no independent motion, but my boss, to freak us out, would ducking wave his 6-fingered hand when we would leave for the day. Story 29. A group of 3 came in together and were loudly debating which ice cream would be best for their big night. On another occasion, a woman grabbed a fresh mozzarella ball from the refrigerated case, started rubbing it along her legs for some reason, then casually put it back and walked away. Apparently, it was some kind of trend inspired by something she'd seen on a daytime TV show at the time. Story 30. Large manufacturing plant. This was a tad after hours, but like in many big companies, plenty of folks are still around after quitting time. I walked into the drawing room, the room with large printouts of drawings of our machines, equipment, parts, etc. These pages were like 3 feet by 5 feet with a lot of technical info on the part. How they are welded, materials, etc. Blueprints, in other words, and they were kept in large flat drawers. I walked in and Dean was ducking Amy from behind in there. This was in the 2006 to 2008 time frame. Story 31. I was working at an independent pharmacy. I'm a pharmacist. The patient brought in a bunch of clearly obvious fake prescriptions for narcotics. I told him I wasn't going to fill them. After arguing for a while, he asked for the prescriptions back, to which I said no. They are going into the shredder. And then I shredded them. His response was to drop his pants and take a shot in the middle of the pharmacy. The weirdest thing I've ever done was at another job. I was on keto and the delis and restaurants near me really didn't serve keto food. So one day I brought in an electric burner, a pan, and beef bacon, and I fried it up right there in the pharmacy. Story 32. A line lead came into work drunk and accidentally ripped out the entire fence around the chemical cage with a forklift. That's not the weird part. She didn't get into any trouble. Not even a warning or a stern talking to. The same line lead also assaulted a temp, which she did get into trouble for. Story 33. Working in it, we often installed IP phones for various large buildings. As part of the checklist for installing the phone, we needed to make sure we had at least a 5-minute phone call with people on both ends to make sure the call quality was good and that the connection wasn't spotty. Someone figured out that reading off the entire text of green eggs and ham took about 5 minutes. So basically, the entire staff memorized the whole thing just to get through the test calls. Story 34. My old boss sometimes tossed a kidney at my shoe from across the room when it was time to deep clean. During my first week, he handed me a pig's head with an apple in its mouth, locked me in the walk-in freezer full of whole animals hanging from the ceiling, and promptly forgot about me. When I finally got out, he took the apple, bit it, and walked to the cutting room floor with the apple still in his mouth to show me the different saws. When I quit to return to school, he said, "This bud's for you," and squeezed the contents from a kidney onto the floor. Still better than cleaning the ice cream machine at McDonald's to a chorus of screaming children for $5.15 per hour. Story 35. I work at McDonald's. A kid came in, stole the frap machine sign, and walked out. The next day, the kid came back. I watched him open up the back seat of his car, pull out the sign, and go put it back the exact same way he stole it, except reverse. Story 36. I used to work as a receptionist at a family member's auto body shop. One of the guys in the back, who I had known my whole life was kind of like a distant uncle figure, had completely covered his work locker in photos of naked, morbidly obese women, like women well over 600 pounds. He must have had hundreds of these pictures taped on the inside and outside of his locker. Story 37. At my current job as a civil servant, providing assistance, resources, and legal advocacy for people facing eviction, I had a case with a tenant who turned out to be a reptile hoarder. That was deeply weird. Story 38. Working as a news photographer and covering a breaking news gang shooting that had just happened. Every 5 minutes or so, a new wave of the victims' family members would drive up and be told the news and lament in anguish in one way or another. Another time, a guy tried to fight me because I was filming at the scene of his son's death. I don't work in news anymore. Story 39. I was employed at an adult toy manufacturer as a purchasing agent for the office, but I did witness the talent getting molded in the back where things were made. Story 40. I worked really late until close to 11 p.m. Probably only 10 people in the whole building, if that. Hit the elevator button, and when it got there, a guy was tongue-kissing a sign on the wall. It didn't have a picture on it. It was just some mundane employee notification. He was clutching his crotch and visibly aroused. I didn't know what to do, so I whirled and headed down to the next set of elevators. Story 41. I am a veterinarian. A woman came in. She stank so strongly of cigarettes, and her cat did as well, and even the transport box had a yellow color from all the smoke. She told me that foreigners shoot electric balls through the walls to hurt her and her cat. She said that is why the cat is sick. According to this woman, the cat got hit with those electric balls and then has seizures and jumps in saltus. The cat was extremely malnourished, lying only on her side, barely breathing, pale, anemia, and there was a palpable tumor in the abdomen. There was no reasoning with the woman. All I could do was to euthanize the poor cat. Story 42. Guy I worked with was new to retail, and we had a floor set to do. Floor set is when you rearrange the store to put out new product, change signs, etc. He first kept asking if anyone needed help building anything because he had construction experience. Except we weren't building anything. We were just rearranging things. On our break, he decided to go skateboarding around the parking lot, wiped out, and ducked up his hand pretty bad. He left, was sent to get medical attention, and we never saw him again. Weird dude. Hope he's okay. Story 43. Midway through an operation with the patient fully under anesthesia, she literally sat right up with eyes wide open, looked at me and screamed, "What?" Then went peacefully back into position. That was ducking crazy. Story 44. We had a room for merchants. They had their own key to walk into this room from the street. One morning, we walked it, and someone had taken a crap in said room. Story 45. 20-something worker with a new boob job flashed a VP in the parking lot, bragging about her new additions. He was fine with it. Tells you a lot about where I worked. Same woman was caught again after we reviewed online chat support transcripts. She was arranging to perform an act in a parked car in the company's lot for money. The guy she was talking to was a regional vice president in sales. Story 46. Probably the absolute weirdest was a woman that caressed my daughter's neck while I was talking to a manager in the hallway. My daughter was probably about 1 year old when it happened. I had no idea who this woman was, but she saw a small child, came over to adore it, and just randomly started caressing the back of my kid's neck. I still cannot understand the mindset of that woman. A slightly similar, albeit only slightly less awkward thing happened a couple of months ago when I brought my family in for Take Your Children to Work Day. My coworker decided to spend the entire day in her office waiting for my family to show up so that she could meet my children. Didn't even say she wanted to meet them, just came into the office expecting me to show her my children. Story 47. A few years ago, I was walking through the retail store I work at, and I heard weird tapping on the floor rapidly coming towards me. Looked around the row of shelves and saw a white tail deer running down the aisle. It had managed to run through the front doors and was trying to get out the back. Called a manager and we opened all the emergency exits to try to let it out. After a few minutes and the poor deer running into stuff and getting a bloody nose, it found its way out and jumped the security fence to freedom. Thankfully, it was a slow night, and we only had a couple of customers in the store, and no one got hurt. Story 48. Found a dude passed out, face down ass up in an aisle, like 3 minutes into my shift when I worked overnights at Walmart. He had red fluid pooling near his mouth, so I called 911 and radioed for management to head to where I was at. I thought he might have had a seizure or odd and smashed a tooth or something when he fell. Turns out dude was just piss drunk, and he had started to wake up while I was on the phone. The ambulance request quickly turned into a police request when he started throwing haymakers at everyone near him, started chucking bottles of wine down the aisle, and then sprinted off to the back of the store into the warehouse. He slammed into one of the mid-shift guys who was on his way out, smacked the employee's phone out of his hand, then punched him in the face before running off again. He ended up being chased around the store by employees and cops for like 10 minutes before he tripped and fell in the clothing department and was handcuffed and dragged away by the cops. Story 49, not me, but my mom was a waitress at a chain diner restaurant. A fire had started in the roof where the big glowing sign was outside, and she was the first to notice the smell of smoke and report it. The fire department was called and everyone was evacuated from the building, but this one old woman wouldn't leave. She was told multiple times about the fire, but she refused to leave and not eat her pancakes. They offered to give her more pancakes later or at another restaurant location, still wouldn't leave. Someone literally went back to grab a box and dump her pancakes in it so she'd leave. She still sat there and complained and moaned about the stupid pancakes until police or firemen had to literally drag her out of the building and off the property and make her leave. I'm not sure how bad the fire was during this whole thing, but the building was a total loss. Nobody was hurt, thankfully. The building had to be bulldozed down and is a mattress store now. How are people like this? Valuing $5 of pancakes more than your life and the lives of everyone around you trying to save you? Bosses of Reddit. What's the weirdest, worst thing you've seen an employee do? Story 1. It was holiday rush season, and I worked at a call center. It was full hands on deck, meaning all the supervisors, support staff, IT folks, accounting, etc. were required to get on the phone. The only ones not allowed on the phones were team managers, about 3 of us. There was this one agent who would take a call, place the caller on hold, and use the restroom. This happened on every call. On the 11th call, I stopped him and asked him if everything is all right. He told me that he needed to pee a lot because he drank a lot of water. I asked him if he could do it between calls and not place a caller on hold. He told me that, no, I will pee when I feel like it, where I feel like it. Then he gives me this crap-eating grin and I noticed what he was doing. He was peeing his pants. Then he shouted, "Won't let me use the bathroom? Tell all of your customers." As security was escorting him to HR, he proceeded to crap his pants in the HR office. We had to close down a quarter of our call center floor to disinfect the carpet, his desk, and the trail of piss to HR. Story 2. I used to be a supervisor in a chemical plant. I saw one employee handle a mix head for toluene diisocyanate without rubber gloves. Direct quote, "I got some of that poison in my cut. It stings." Throw an empty pallet from a high deck onto the floor without any warning or heads up, making a huge bang, while my boss was with me. Climb into the garbage crusher and start tossing stuff out because it was jammed, without turning the crusher off and removing the key. I discovered this as I was getting ready to dump a pallet load of heavy trash from a forklift. If I hadn't noticed the stuff flying out, it could have ended very, very badly. After an accidental spill of a diisocyanate, I held my breath and managed to dump ammonia, which neutralizes it, over the entire area. This was scary as hell, and I finally made a break out the back door, gasping for breath. He walked up and asked, "Is it time for a smoke break?" It was after the last incident I convinced my boss that we had to let him go, for everybody's safety, especially his. Story 3. Well, at this one company I worked at, I was a foreman, and my crew was doing a job with another crew who was led by this real ducktard, who treated his guys like crap. I wouldn't even let him talk to my guy. Basically, if he said one word to my guys, they were to tell him to duck off and come talk to me if he had a problem, so that I could tell him to duck off too. He was the kind of that would ream people out for mistakes that he told them to do. Yeah, that guy. He got this guy put on his crew who I could tell right away knew his crap. I talked to him a bit and basically asked why he was doing entry level when I could tell by his habits and pace that he was very experienced. And he mentioned that he had just finished doing 4 years in the pen and needed money and just took what he found. I was actually standing on the ground watching him work and thinking about calling in and seeing if I could get him on my crew for the next site and away from the spaz, when said crapwit starts screaming at the guy and hitting with his hat like a retard. And the guy said nothing. And after about a minute of screaming, the guy silently pushed his foreman off the second-story roof. He climbed down the ladder, grabbed his bag, nodded at me, and walked off. I never saw him again. Maybe this story wasn't appropriate, as it's also the best thing I've seen an employee do. Story 4. Discovered an employee having sex in a linen closet with a hotel guest. Doesn't sound too strange. Now picture the employee as a drop-dead gorgeous 20-year-old female, and the hotel guest is an overweight, 55-year-old guy that looks like Santa Claus. That was a very odd conversation I had to have with her the next day about it being inappropriate to have sex with guests on hotel property. Also, I'm pretty sure she had a Santa fetish and this guy cashed in. Story 5. One time I was working at the Olive Garden. We had a girl who was a part-time model working as a hostess, first day on the job. We got a report from a customer a stall in the women's bathroom was showered in vomit. So we decided to screw with the new girl and ask her to clean it up. 10 minutes later, the bathroom stall was scrubbed clean and the girl had absolutely no emotional reaction to it whatsoever. Wow, you handled that pretty good, I said. I thought you would be all grossed out by having to deal with so much vomit. She just shrugged it off and said, I've seen way too much of my own vomit to be bothered by anyone else's. Story 6. Okay, so our office used to be near a catering company, and every day of the week they had a different lunch special. Wednesdays were the best cause they had meatloaf, and it was ducking delicious. So, one Wednesday, 2 employees whose desks were next to each other were enjoying their meatloaf, veggies, and mac and cheese. Let's call them Matt and Kyle. By way of a little backstory, the office was populated with younger guys and older man-children. It was pretty common for us to be crude and not really professional. It was a calling center for fundraising. Anyway, it was pretty common for people to fart on each other. Points were assessed if you could get the person to turn around and look at you just as you farted in their face. All in all, not a mature work environment, but a lot of fun. So, back to the story. Kyle and Matt are eating lunch. Kyle gets up to get some water and gets that familiar feeling of having to fart, sneaks up on Matt, and just as Matt puts a bite in his mouth, Kyle rips a loud one right on him and his food. Matt's normally a really chill guy, but this time, he sees red. From across the room, I see Kyle sit down chuckling, not seeing the potential ass beating sitting right next to him. Matt picks up his whole plate and wham, slams it into Kyle's face and chest. He didn't physically hit him, like the plate didn't cause any damage, but Kyle was sitting there, shocked, drenched in meatloaf and mac and cheese. Matt stormed out and went home for the day, which I was okay with given the circumstances, and Kyle cleaned himself up, cleaned up the food on the floor, and finished out the day. The next day, they both apologized and are still pretty good friends to this day. Story 7. We have an employee who hid under her desk. This was a very busy environment, so she just piled up boxes in front of her, under her desk in the main area, think cubicle style, and hid. I wasn't around at the time, but my boss jokes about it to this day. Story 8. I spent 7 years managing McDonald's. I've seen some bizarre behavior from both sides of the counter. I'll just cover some highlights. 1. Male, 18 years old. Suffered a brain injury that left him functional, but stunted his ability to reason. A customer approached me, saying I needed to go check a situation in the restroom. This usually means feces on the wall or a clogged toilet. What I saw will forever be ingrained in my mind. Said employee was siphoning urine out of a urinal with a drinking straw and spitting it into the sink. It was an awkward phone call to his father. 2. Female, mid-20s, had random seizure fits. Weirdest one was while handing cash in back drive-thru. Customer handed her $20, and as soon as she made contact with it, she had a seizure. Ended up spitting in the guy's face until the drive-thru moved. He wasn't happy, but became a bit more understanding when he figured it out. I felt terrible. She was a great worker, and woman otherwise. 3. Male, 21 years old, walked into bathroom after lobby close to hear him chopping, and then snorting a line. Sent him home, talked the next day, and fired him. This one broke my heart, as he was a good worker. He just didn't know how to drink coffee. I'm sure there's more, but I'll just leave it at this for now. Story 9. One employee likes to bring in a dozen sausages with potatoes and veggies for lunch on Monday. He'll then proceed to heat the whole thing up in the microwave, take a few bites, and put it back into the fridge to repeat the process again until it's all gone on Friday. There are days where he'll heat it up on his breaks, too. He also does shots of the water left over in tuna cans, hence his nickname, Tuna Shooters. Story 10. Not me as such, but my father had an employee once who was pretty strange. He had lots of little odd quirks that everyone put up with until one day he declared he was quitting his job to become a pirate and promptly left to go live by the coast. Story 11. I've come across a fair number of odd ducks, but one of Favas is that guy who used to nap in his office during lunch. Not a big deal, except this dude used to cover himself in trash bags to conserve body heat as he napped. So you'd walk by his office and he was basically a garbage bag mummy, leaning back in his chair, feet up on the desk. We had another guy, and this really is more of a tragic story than just weird, but poor dude had a psychotic break. I think the stress overwhelmed him because he wasn't doing especially well with the part of the business he was responsible for. But he disappeared one day. We're located in the southwest US. Then resurfacing a few days later in the Pacific Northwest sans luggage, wallet, phone, and blabbering about the FBI being after him and how he was being watched. It was really unfortunate. Story 12. I was concerned about a young associate that did not show up for work and did not call out. After several unsuccessful attempts to reach him on the phone, He eventually answered and said he was too ill to come in. When asked why he didn't call out, he said, "I did call. Oh wait, maybe I dreamed I called." Story 13. Caught a few employees wrestling under the table on Christmas parties and pleasure in the bathroom. Other than that, not too bad. Had an employee call in sick because her cat had a cold, which was a weird situation. Story 14. During a training class, an employee nonchalantly lifted her shirt and tucked it into the underside of her dingy bra to expose her pasty and crepey gut. She then proceeded to pop a pimple on said gut and lick her fingers clean of the resulting pore paste. She would also stick her hands down her pants to scratch. Story 15. I once spent a quarter training recruits during basic training, not us. We spent 2 weeks in the forest in the end of February, so it got bristling cold. The coldest night was minus 21 degrees Celsius. Now recruits, me included back in the day, are generally never able to believe that you have to wear as little as possible for the sleeping bag to properly heat up. This one fellow had a better idea, or so he thought. He would just sneak out to the fire when most of the superiors were asleep and sleep in the bag directly next to the fire pit. He managed to fall asleep, and of course, the inevitable happened. He rolled right into the pit. The fire watch was able to get him out of harm's way before he got injured, but the sleeping bag completely burned away. Now, normally that would have meant he wouldn't be able to sleep for the rest of the exercise, but the first sergeant was way too nice and got him a replacement. Despite several of my warnings and threats, he actually tried it again the next night. This time he fell in immediately. Again, he was unharmed, but the next few days weren't fun for him. Best part, he was a sergeant candidate. Oh, and another one. One recruit actually shat in his bunk. He thought covering it up and just sleeping in the sleeping bag would get him until the next time they were allowed to change sheets. Story 16. The best part of being a manager is the absolute comedy employees provide you. Some of my favorites in my career. A woman who would regularly call in sick on a Monday, invariably because some sort of family emergency had occurred. In a 6-month period, her sister died, or her boyfriend had beaten her daughter had burgled her house, and she was bitten by a pit bull. Strangely, these things always happened on a Sunday, and when she was injured, she always recovered very quickly. A guy who called a nice customer because the customer had asked him politely to call back later. He was fired, but during his meeting with me in HR, said his rights had been violated, and he was entitled to call customers if he deemed them to deserve it. A woman who stank of alcohol every day and explained it away as exotic perfume that no one had ever heard of, not even Google. A woman who told me she wanted to join my department in an interview because her ex worked for me and she wanted to keep an eye on him. Or ending fun. Story 17. I worked for a broadcasting company. We had one of our play-by-play guys show up to call a high school football game completely smashed. The first quarter, he was just slightly more energetic and started screaming everything he said by the second. The entire third quarter was spent pretending he was Jim Ross, complete with catchphrases. The fourth quarter, he was completely incoherent and just mumbled a lot. According to the athletic director of the school, our man also pissed off the back of the press box during the game. He no longer works for us. Story 18. So many things. One woman made a point in every meeting of bringing up the fact she was in a serious wreck 4 years ago. One girl brought up, when asking for help with a problematic printer, brings up to the tech that she had an abortion a few years ago, which she thought was weird because the guy blew his load on her couch cushions. 2 employees were on an open intercom system, talking because one was bored and had to watch some equipment. They went on for an hour and a half bad-mouthing everyone who ran the place, unaware that it fed to a speaker system in a managerial meeting room where one manager was meeting. When we had to confront them about it, they went to HR feeling their rights had been violated. One was fired, the other given a severe reprimand. For a community benefit at one job, we gave away gift cards to single parents in the community to help buy school supplies. After the event, there was about $2,000 in gift cards left, and then a month later, there wasn't. One employee helped himself to them. His excuse was, he thought nobody needed them and couldn't see why anyone in management thought this was in any way similar to stealing. He was fired. Story 19. My dad was a project manager for a company whose primary client is the US Navy. There was one particular member of the team, a rather overweight man named Mike, who seemed to be an endless font of weird stories. Mike was in charge of the networking of one particular computer lab. Anytime someone went into the lab, he would remote into one of the computers, make it start playing that annoying as hell crazy frog that was popular some years ago, for God knows what reason, at full volume, and then lock the computer. Nobody managed to work in that lab for longer than 10 minutes. Another game Mike liked to play was Howl Like a Wolf. There would be a bunch of high-ranking government officials, uniformed naval officers, and execs of the company sitting around a boardroom in the middle of a meeting, and all of a sudden, they would hear the sounds of a wolf howling from outside the door. Confusion and panic would obviously ensue, and my dad always had to explain, "No, don't worry, that's just Mike." Mike never offered any explanation for this behavior. One day, Mike didn't show up to work. My dad asked someone what happened. Turns out, Mike was a beekeeper and had gotten a new shipment of bees and that he was planning on introducing to the hive. Unfortunately, these bees were not in fact bees, but African killer hornets. So, when he released them, they attacked. Mike began running desperately towards a lake on his property in an attempt to get away, but as I mentioned before, Mike was rather overweight and thus not up to running. Mike died that day, not from African killer hornets, but of a heart attack. Apparently, they spent the entire funeral getting drunk and telling Mike stories. You just can't make that stuff up. Story 20. Once, I asked an employee to install a new company patrons-only parking sign in our lot. The community center across the street usually had 30 to 40 of their cars parked in our spaces. Later that day, I went outside, and there was no sign anywhere. After searching for about 10 minutes, I realized he had accidentally installed it in their parking lot instead of ours. I laughed so hard I left it there, until their director called me 2 days later asking what exactly was going on. Story 21. I've owned my business for 3 years now and manage a small team of 3 or 4 people. In all that time, no one has ever called in sick. Not once. I honestly don't know how that's possible. They're incredible. I practically have to insist that they take time off. Story 22. When I managed a specialty retail store for adults, I once had to sit down with an employee and review security footage of him taking a product without paying for it and then using it in the stockroom. The meeting was deeply uncomfortable, but watching his facial expressions slowly change as the footage played was unforgettable. Story 23. One of my employees once made a serious threat toward my father. The situation escalated quickly. Authorities got involved, and a restraining order was put in place soon after. Story 24. I've got 2 stories from the same place, a small local pizza shop I managed during college. First, we hired a high school kid at his very first job. About a week in, he dropped a pair of tongs into the deep fryer and instinctively reached in to grab them. That shift ended early for obvious reasons. Second, 2 employees thought it would be hilarious to add special ingredients to a pizza being delivered to one of their teachers. It was not, in fact, hilarious. Story 25. One summer, I had a camp staff member post explicit photos of himself online. And for reasons I still can't explain, he listed the camp's address as the pickup location. That led to some very uncomfortable conversations. Story 26. I have so many stories from supervising the overnight shift. For some reason, that shift seemed to attract the most unusual personalities. The latest one involved a kid named Anthony. I'm not sure whether or not Anthony is really this weird, or if he is just trolling all of us. So Anthony is in a ticket booth, and one of the supervisors goes to talk to him about upselling. He notices Anthony has constructed a necklace made out of rubber bands and a Powerade bottle, sort of reminiscent of Flava Flav, but even more ridiculous because it's a Powerade bottle instead of a clock. The supervisor tells Anthony he cannot wear the Powerade bottle necklace, and that he in fact should never have constructed the Powerade bottle necklace, because if he has that much downtime, he should be cleaning, getting people from the other lines to come to him, etc. Figures it's done. Later on, another supervisor approaches the ticket booth. We've been having a bit of a bee problem, and their first instinct is that Anthony is being attacked by bees as he's waving his hands all over the place. When he gets closer, he realizes that Anthony is swinging his Powerade bottle / rubber band contraption all around his head like a lasso or something. Cue another discussion about the contraption and about appropriate use of work time. I don't know why the other SUP didn't confiscate the bottle and rubber bands at this point. Later on, I approached the ticket booth. Anthony has managed to lock himself out of the ticket booth, has failed to notify anyone or do anything other than stand outside and chat with guests and direct them to the other ticket booth, and is wearing the bottle necklace again. We have a discussion about not leaving the booth, and I tell him that he can't wear the necklace anymore, or he will be written up. He pulls a small cross necklace from underneath his shirt and says that he has been wearing it since he got the job and that the handbook says it's okay, and why is it now a problem? I have to keep a straight face and tell him that that is not the necklace I'm talking about. I'm discussing the one made out of rubber bands and a Powerade bottle that we have been speaking to him about all day. I confiscated it, and he has not made another one to my knowledge. One day he approached people in the clock and room and asked them if they wanted his junk. This was done in a very creepy voice and asked to all the females in particular. When he was told this was unacceptable and he needed to knock it off ASAP, he feigned ignorance and said he was just trying to be nice and share his lunch. He will randomly shout, "Demon be gone," at people. Story 27. I was a manager at Taco Bell. Oh, the stories. We had a bus of high school basketball players stop in. My front cashier went to the men's restroom with one of them for half an hour. I wasn't the manager at the time, but was on duty when a guy got canned for putting a mouse in the deep fryer. I had a kid walk out on me in a packed restaurant using the line from Half-Baked. I was not the cool one. I used to bust an employee wolfing down the Oreo brownies and strawberry pies in the walk-in cooler. One of my cashiers stopped taking orders when we were in the middle of a rush, grabbed a fork, went to the break area, and started scratching her foot viciously with it. I was flashed by a male employee, completely randomly. I turned the corner, and he made this whoop noise and just pulled it out. Not just flopped it out, but like stretched it up towards his chest. I used to have an ill-tempered gal who threw a Mexican pizza at the wall beside a complaining customer. The same girl took a hard-shell taco and smashed it on the counter. To be fair, these customers were ridiculously rude. The sex, all of the sex, all the time, all over the place. Story 28, get violent with another employee. Employee A, 6 feet 3 inches, 250 pounds, took exception to employee B, 5 feet 2 inches, 120 pounds, putting garbage in his trash can. I decided that the best and most rational course of action was to throw the garbage can at the B. They can explode it on his desk and sent garbage everywhere. Story 29. This is reverse, but I had a boss that was out on bail for beating and stabbing his wife to death. He tossed the evidence in the trash can at the office. Story 30. I was working at a car lot that had a spike strip. Our drivers knew about this. I saw one of them attempt to run the spike strip. He didn't make it, popping the first 2 tires. Rather than back up or seek help from the tow truck 20 yards away, he had his co-driver jump out, hold up the bar telling him that the spike strip was deployed, and then proceeded to pop the rear tires too. He filed a union grievance after we cited him for incompetence. Story 31. I was managing a retail store and went to a web page to find something, and the autofill populated with Jenna James on the star. I asked the employee about the time spent on the adult site, and he claimed he had a friend with the same name and did accidentally. I searched the browser history, and apparently he searched the wrong website for his friend for about 40 minutes. Story 32, caught a girl do substances in the bathroom before her shift. When she came out of the stall, her hair was unwashed and so ridiculously teased high that it looked like a huge multicolored bird's nest on top of her head. It was bizarre. She grabbed my hand and made me feel the swollen track mark lump on her forearm, all while giggling madly. Yeah, story 33. I once had to share an office with this old weirdo who talked all the time about his Viagra prescription and all the geriatric he was getting. He was graphic. He also acted out in the strangest ways, like Windows Vista had just come out with Texas Holder poker on it. He sat at his desk playing it all day, and whenever he went all in, he would jump out of his chair and thrust his hips at the screen, screaming, all in, over and over until I asked him to stop. This was a daily thing. Story 34. When I first started my job at Taco Bell, one of my managers told me to go get more flatbreads from the freezer. When I went back there and opened the door, I saw one of my co-workers on his knees, pants below his ass, clearly pleasure himself. It essentially went like this. Me. Him. Oh, what are you doing here? And me getting flatbreads. Him. Here you go, man. Now please go. Me. Thanks. He still works here, and I have since become manager. In Story 35, I work as a contractor at Newport News Shipbuilding. We had about 80 people on the job working on a new construction ship. We are a painting and sandblasting company, so some of these folks are a little bit sketchy. Anyways, we had 2 people get in a fight who got thrown out of the yard. So the guy that was supervising our contract gets our whole night shift together and has a meeting explaining how if we screw up again, we will probably get thrown out of the shipyard. He goes on again about how when we get near the delivery/launch date of the boat, people tend to get very stressed. He states that if anyone needs to relax and relieve their stress level somehow, they should take care of that. Not 20 minutes later, security trucks are pulled up next to the paint shack along the main traffic avenue of the shipyard. And this dude was getting escorted out because he lit up a joint and was walking around smoking that crap out in broad daylight around 2 p.m. We ended up not getting kicked out and have a couple new contracts, but that was seriously about the dumbest thing you could do. There are so many confined spaces you could go in and just blow it in a ventilation tube or whatnot. This seriously blew my mind. I guess he took the whole stress relief thing out of context. Story 36. I work for a vehicle recovery company. One of my drivers felt the call of nature whilst attending a roadside repair. Then he got a cardboard box and a carrier bag, got into the back of his van, and proceeded to do his worst. Then he got out and carried on with the job. Amazing. Story 37. Had one of my employees at a previous job outside on the sidewalk smoking. He thought there was nothing wrong since he was far enough away from our building. Story 38. Knew someone who would make a month's worth of peanut butter sandwiches and kept them in the freezer. Would then just have one for lunch every day, after nuking them, of course. Not sure how that sandwich the last day would taste. Story 39. I was in my boss's office with one of my employees and my boss to discuss the HR harassment complaint we had gotten about said employee. During the discussion, he falls asleep. Ducks given that day? 0. Story 40. Walked to the back of the shop and saw this guy staring at our ceiling. I asked what he was doing. He replied, "How many ceiling tiles do you think are in here?" in a deadpan voice. Without looking down, I just walked off. Was so glad when he left at the end of the season. Story 41. Kid that I used to work with. Homeschooled. Nice kid, but really odd. When asked to organize the filing cabinets, he alphabetized them from front to back in the top drawer and then back to front in the next. Continued down the cabinet that way, and then in the next, it went from bottom to top. By the time anyone noticed, it would have required redoing the entire job, so it stayed that way until I had a weekend project to fix it. Once actually got his tie caught in the paper shredder, just like in a movie. I honestly believe he did it on purpose to get attention. Once claimed he was robbed on the way back from the post office, in broad daylight, in the business part of a small town, on Wednesday. Used to claim the street raced his car. There was no street racing going on for miles and miles from where he lived, and he drove a hatchback with no modifications. I could go on and on. Story 42. One server I used to work with would eat food off of people's plates after they were done, even if the food was half-eaten of the shake had been drank out of Story 43. The chef, M, at the bar/resto I managed, was making tomato sauce one morning. The head waiter, J, saw him put sugar in it and freaked out. M became enraged, as none but him knows how to cook. An acidic sauce requires sugar. J said that anyone with a brain did not put sugar in tomato sauce, but added some carrots while it cooked. They are both loud by nature and enjoy yelling as their communication medium. I would like to add that this is taking place in an open kitchen. Luckily, the place was empty save 3 to 4 other staff members and a regular customer who was used to drama. M and J's fight had now moved to the back area, where the delivery door is. I'm not sure who/what happened, but they started punching each other. At that exact moment, my boss came in by the delivery door and everybody froze. M and J mid-punch, our regular/staff gleefully looking on and standing between them with a pot in one hand, me. We warmly remember that event as the Great Tomato Sauce War of '09. Story 44. I'm an assistant manager at a movie theater in a Z. I was on my knees fixing a bottom hinge of a door when an employee threw a cane at my head. He said he just meant to toss it at me, but he was an ass anyways. When I told my GM what happened, he told me to fire him, which I gladly accepted. This guy was 43 and working at a movie theater, and he was mean to customers all day while he listened to music and didn't wear uniform, so he had it coming anyways. After firing him, he botched me out with every swear in the book. Story 45 saw one of my ducking green turtles walk off the edge of a cliff into ducking oblivion. What was he thinking? He definitely wasn't going to get that mustachioed plumber that way at Story 46. I was once managing an architectural salvage yard a couple of summers ago, getting a bit of pounds in before returning to university for year 2. We had a kitten at the yard, and it was the cutest thing ever. Next door was a haulage company that had an old mangy cat that used to sulk around like Sean Ducking Bean in Goldeneye, all scars on its face and crap. Well, one day, I was napping on my lunch break in the sun, and I wake up to a sound akin to 400 rats burning alive. It was my kitten, pinned up in the corner of the yard where bricks were stacked 4 pallets high, with that Sean Bean-looking mother ducker going absolutely sick, scratching and biting and hissing at my little kitten. This was happening about 15 meters from where I was. Well, duck that, I jumped up, grabbed a piece of stone that was near me, and launched that fist-sized rock in this get-cat Satan spawn's direction. Just as it raised its paw to slash at Claude, what I called my kitten, the stone smashed directly into this old git's neck, sending it tumbling into a pallet of bricks, writhing in pain. Sean Beancat never came back to my ghetto. Claude is the boss, Story 47. I wasn't his boss, but on my first day working at Cosi in Chicago, I walked into the back room to put my stuff down. There was a guy cleaning a gun, and he turns to me as I stopped in the doorway and says, "I'm Will, and I'm the best there is." I'm not sure where he stashed the gun while he was baking the bread, but I like to imagine it was tucked away in the flour somewhere. Then a few weeks later, he stopped coming to work, and I found out via the news that he had been arrested in conjunction with the murder of Jennifer Hudson's family members up until today. I thought he was innocent, but I guess as of earlier this year, he's serving 3 life sentences. Apparently, he is not the best there is. Story 48. I had an artist who would fall asleep on her keyboard on a daily basis. But that's not nearly as interesting as my old boss, who would insist that everyone in the company smoke them before starting work for the day. Story 49. I was an assistant manager at a pet store and had creepy Steve working for me. This is a few highlights. We had a lesbian employee with a really hot girlfriend. Creepy Steve proceeded to invite her and her partner over for a session with him and his girlfriend. The best part was that he was about 5 feet 6 inches and maybe 100 pounds. His girlfriend was about 5 feet 9 inches and 350 pounds. Towards the end of my talk with him and how incredibly inappropriate he was, she came into the office and said, "The only junk we need is the one we take off and put back in the drawer." He would constantly wince in pain and claim that he frequently dislocated his hip. After hearing it several times, I finally faked that it was an emergency situation and pretended to call 911. He kept trying to stop me, but I informed him that it is incredibly difficult for a femur to slip out of a socket joint, and he would need to see an orthopedic surgeon immediately. It was amazing how quickly he recovered. Some old woman who would come in every several weeks left her cane in the store, so I kept it in our office to return to her later. She had several, so there was no sense of urgency. A few days later, he comes limping into the store using the cane with hip issues, of course. He struggled with it all day around the store, and some of the customers looked concerned, although nobody said anything. As we were closing down, I finally told him to return the cane to the office in case the old lady came back in front of the other handful of employees. He promised to do it in the morning. He was being way inappropriate with a customer, telling them how their pit bull puppy was predisposed to violence and aggression. He kept on and on about it until another assistant manager got into a screaming match with him in front of our district manager. He didn't do anything about it, but wouldn't fire Creepy Steve, although he deserved it. He wouldn't work Tuesday nights because of Guys Night, which turned out to be LARPing. I had put in my 2 weeks' notice and his girlfriend had come in. Another employee was a great smartass and very subtly ripping on them, and they had no clue. He asked if her pants were really leather. Creepy Steve claimed they were, and cost him $800 or something ridiculous. I caught the conversation while walking by and without stopping just said, "That's impossible. They don't make cows that big." Story 50. I used to run a small lab. One lab assistant once left the key in the ignition of our RV in the middle of the desert while we ran some business after I had told him multiple times to put it in a safe place. Long story short, this duck-up of his resulted in us getting stuck there for a whole weekend and almost dying of dehydration. Story 51. I asked an associate to get our tall ladder to pull down a shirt that was hanging near the front window. He got the tall ladder, and instead of opening it, decided to lean it against the front window. Entire front of the store is glass. I'm 5 foot tall, and I leapt a 4-foot counter in a single bound. I caught him on the second step. The window had started to bow out of the frame. He couldn't understand why I was crying and screaming at the same time. Story 52. Hired 2 guys to work kitchen. They were a best friend/roommate combo. Nice guys, except guys thought they were wizards. Like real. I make spells, mother ducker, wizards. On their breaks, would try to flirt with the underage female employees by telling them about those magic skills. This went on for about a week or so when one of them had to clean the grill unsupervised for the first time. The grill in question was a clamshell grill, where the top lowers to meet the flat bottom. You pour the cleaner on the flat part, scrub it with the brush, and use the rest to scrub the top. You wipe the top with a cloth, and then use warm water to clear off the bottom. Mr. Magic decided it would be faster to close the clam and dump water on the top. Of course, the clam is sealed to protect from stuff spattering up, not water pouring down. These beasts run off 220 volts. The instant the water got inside the clam, he was thrown off his feet into the prep table. Whether it was the force of the shock or the fright of it, it was a good 2 to 3 feet. Of course, then his arm was shaking uncontrollably, and we was sent to the hospital. He refused to come back. His partner quit shortly after. I guess they've never heard of protection spells. Story 53. In college, I worked as a quality analyst at a call center. Basically, it was my job to monitor live and recorded calls to make sure the phone reps were meeting quality standards. We had this creepy perv that liked to call in under the guise of being a customer interested in applying for a Visa card. He'd engage the female caller quite professionally for a bit before finding a way to tell a ducked-up story that he apparently would get off on. His favorite was an account of how his little sister was dubbed by a group of strangers. Twisted crap. The reps would get upset and disconnect and report the incident, and we'd have to pull the recording and document the incident. He had done this dozens of times over a period of months. He'd always call from a blocked number and would always give bogus info, so stopping him was tough. The goal was to catch him live, interrupt the call, and threaten him with legal action if he were to call back. He became our white whale. Everyone knew who he was and what he sounded like. One day, I noticed that a rep, Dawn, was on a call for over 30 minutes. This was unusual because the calls almost never lasted more than 5 to 7 minutes. So I put on my headset and punched into her call to find out what was up. I immediately recognized the perv's voice and quickly deduced that he was Pleasure himself. I jumped up and signaled one of the supervisors, and then I froze. Not only was Dawn not oblivious to what was going on, she was an active participant. I threw down my headset, ran to her supervisor, explained what was going on, and together we approached Dawn's station. She looked startled as we approached, quickly released the call, grabbed her purse, and said she had to use the bathroom and bolted out the door before we could even say a word. We never saw her again. She didn't even come in to pick up her final paycheck. Story 54. A drunk employee grabs an 8-inch kitchen knife and then grabs the manager's shirt with a death grip. The manager yells, "Help! Somebody help me!" Almost a dozen employees just stand there, seeming in shock, and nobody does anything to help. No, the manager wasn't in a hole. Some switch flipped in the drunk employee and they became homicidal. The manager eventually got free, and the drunk dropped the knife. The MGR grabbed the employee and pushed them out the front door, locked it, then called the cops. Minor puked outside a few times before the cops came. When they finally arrived, they called the kids' parents to come get them. Area manager was called and told what happened. Manager said they wanted to close the store early because they were so shaken up and couldn't think straight. After a long silence, he said, "Okay, just do the best you can in closing and go home."